Should I hold it like an absolute boss? What's up, everybody? It's your girl, and we back talking about strategy RPGs. Why am I talking like Donkey? Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about tactical JRPGs. One tactical JRPG in particular. For most people, tactical JRPGs kind of came into their awareness with the release of Final Fantasy Tactics, despite the genre reaching pretty far back into even as far back as original Famicom games and being on the PC, although PC tactical RPGs tended to follow more in the footsteps of wargame board game adaptations and less tactical RPGs as we know them now. But the game I want to talk about specifically today is a game called Kartia, The World of Fate. This is actually, I got really excited to cover this game because I actually have a physical copy of it, and this is a game that I have a little bit of history with. Growing up, I had a relative that had a huge collection of PlayStation RPGs, influenced hugely what I played when I was a kid and what I had exposure to. But what was particularly cool about it is that he had a lot of games that were either harder to find or like limited run games, things like that. So he had a copy of Final Fantasy Tactics, obviously. He had a copy of this game. And he had a copy of Suikoden 2, which is like, maybe I'll pull up a graphic of it, but it's insanely hard to find and incredibly expensive. So let's get back to Kartia though. Kartia is a game that was created by Atlus R&D Team 1. Of course, most people know Atlus for their series, things like the Persona games, SMT games, other kind of weird niche JRPG products that don't seem like they would be localized, but did in fact get localized. Atlus did a lot of localizing on kind of what you might consider risky for the time JRPG products. And, oh god, I'm just looking at the waveform right now, and it's my plosives. My plosives are out of control. This game came out a year after Final Fantasy Tactics, but has some really interesting, unique concepts and unique elements that I think make it worthwhile to look at. So let's get to it. Roll that clip footage. Kartia, The World of Fate is set in the world of Rebus. Really quick fun fact, in Japan and PAL regions the game was released as Rebus. For some reason we got it Kartia, The World of Fate in the US. But anyway, it's your typical medieval setting with the magic system being the thing that's completely unique to the world. See, in this world, all of the magic that ever was and ever will be, as well as the way that it's incorporated into technology, is based around Kartia. Essentially, a card that holds a certain amount of words that themselves have magical properties. These are created by encryptors, who have various skills and different levels of ability, and can be stronger by their ability in encryption, as well as what material the Kartia is inscribed upon. One of my favorite little details about this game is that everything, and I mean almost everything in this game, is controlled by Kartia. There's a scene in the very beginning where characters are all standing around chatting, and one of them's like, oh, hey, do you want some coffee? And the other one's like, yeah, man, I create a mean coffee. And they just pull out mugs and make some coffee out of Kartia. It's a little bit goofy, but it does a good job of illustrating how important it is to the world. After the opening text crawl, you're given the choice between two characters, Toxa Classico and Lacrima Christi. One of the cool things about the narrative of this game is it's actually split up between the two characters, a thing that was kind of common for JRPGs at the time. In order to understand and experience the full narrative, you would have to play through both characters' stories. At various points, characters from either Toxa or Lacrima's story will cross over into the other one's story, and there are a couple of shared chapters in between them, but for the most part they are completely unique playthroughs. Once loading up a new game, you're probably going to notice the really unique character portrait art. This is of course due to the fact that Yoshitaka Amano was contracted to do all of the character portrait art as well as the enemy design. You almost certainly are already familiar with Yoshitaka Amano's artwork, as he did all of the character designs as well as enemy designs for Final Fantasies 1 through 6, as well as doing other artwork for popular manga, and even doing the cover of a Vogue magazine. And looking at the art, no wonder I turned out queer. Look at all of these feminine looking dudes and people wearing lipstick and shit. It's incredible. This art style I remember at first being really off-putting to me, but Yoshitaka Amano has quickly turned into one of my very favorite artists of all time. Obviously. Those that are familiar with the flow of a tactical RPG should be pretty at home here. Essentially, the game is bisected into story scenes, which are narrative scenes, complete with sprite animations that tell the in-between stories of when you're not fighting, and the actual battle scenes where you do the tactical battles. As an interesting point, at the end of each battle sequence there is a intermission that allows you to save your progress, as well as fight an optional arena battle that will give you more resources to use while you're in your next battle. Overall, I found that the story sequences are really well animated. Not only are the sprites on screen fun and expressive, but it's obvious that Yoshitaka Amano has drawn multiple character portraits to reflect different emotions being portrayed. That, combined with little sound stings or musical cues, generally do a good job of creating the atmosphere of the game. But let's talk about what's special about Kartia. So the big thing in this game is that you have a handful of human characters, but most of your characters that will be sort of rank and file fodder are going to be phantoms. In this game, people can use Kartia to create artificial life forms. These are determined by obviously what words you put on the Kartia, and these produce different results each time. These differentiate in a variety of ways, but most likely you'll notice that they're different in terms of how far they can move, what terrain they can move on, what items they can equip, and various elemental strengths or weaknesses. We'll talk a little bit more about mixing Kartia types later, but you can also customize the phantoms by how they are created with different words. The phantoms in the game follow a rock, paper, scissors style strength and weakness triangle that should be familiar to people who play Fire Emblem games, as it's basically the same thing as the weapon triangle, except here it's literally rock, paper, and scissor, or shadow, common, and doll. And for the most part, unless you're dealing with a phantom that's specifically quite stronger, a doll will always be stronger against a shadow than a common type. At the beginning of each battle, you are allotted a certain amount of phantoms that you can create. Phantoms that aren't killed in between battles will transfer to the next battle. If you need to, you can also delete phantoms that you still have hanging around, as well as phantoms gain levels that will transfer across battles. The next thing that's pretty unique about the game is that there are no item or equipment shops. Instead, you once again use Kartia to create any equipment that you need, or pick it up as a reward for completing a battle. One of the three types of armor being head, body, or foot, and one of the three types of weapons being sword, axe, and spear. These all start out pretty basic, but again, as you increase your Kartia library, you will have access to more and more powerful variations. One of the things of interesting note is that all equipment in the game has a specific rating, with E being the lowest and A being the highest. Each character and Phantom has the ability to equip a piece of equipment of a maximum of a certain type. So you'll notice that when you're looking at the weapon or armor creation screen, they are broken out into what they refer to as high quality weapons, which are usually things from rating C to A, and lower quality weapons, which are things from rating C down to E. Generally speaking, these two categories fall into the light armor, heavy armor trope, which the light armor gives you more agility but less defense, whereas heavy armor takes away agility but gives you more defense. There is another kind of interesting and unique weapon triangle going on in this game as well, with the actual weapons themselves. There is a difference between axes, spears, and swords, with axes being strong against units that are below you, and spears being strong against units that are above you. Swords are the typical all-arounder ability, and good against any terrain. And finally, the most important thing, arguably, is the way that magic works in this game. All magic comes from Kartia, of course. In the beginning of the game, you'll have very basic spells that are made up of very basic grammar. When you go to cast a spell, it will pull up a menu that will allow you to add different pieces of grammar to affect different attributes about the spell. Sometimes it'll change the range of it, sometimes the amount of damage, even sometimes it will add special weaknesses or vulnerabilities to certain enemies. Some cases it will even change whether it does damage or heals. Similar to how the weapons and equipment are split up, spells are also split up between element, that being fire, wind, earth, water, and healing, as well as spells that are focused on doing damage to a single unit versus spells that are focused on doing damage to a group of units. So, with the basic ideas out of the way, let's talk pros and cons. Generally, I think this is a pretty good game, and I enjoyed most of my time with it. I will say, however, that for as central as the Kartia mechanic is for the game, it doesn't seem like it's very well polished or could have used a little bit more time in development. While having large selections of grammar and different texts that you can control and combine seems to promise a lot of different combinations for the magical spells, it usually just boils down to, do you want to do more damage and can you afford to spend the resource to cast the spell? With the phantoms and equipment, it gives it a little bit more granularity, but for the most part you're just going to be wanting to create the basic thing, because it doesn't need to be more complex than that to get through the game. And speaking of trying to make things more complex than they need to be, boy is creating phantoms and weapons a headache. Like, every time you want to create a new individual piece of equipment, you have to go into the menu, create it, watch it play its animation, then go to the unit and equip it. Then go and do another one, and another one, and another one, each of them individually, each of them with whatever grammar combination you want to do, and watch the animation to create them. This is really frustrating and sucks a lot of time, and in my playthrough I found myself actually putting off creating new equipment until I really felt like I needed it, which, to be fair, was not often. The same thing goes with creating phantoms. I think that there was a really cool idea here in having a variety of different types, but generally speaking, as you progress in the game, you get more and more powerful ones, and instead of making them more unique or varied, you just want to use the most recent one that you have access to. You don't want to worry about carrying them over in between battles because phantoms will never be strong enough on the enemy's side for that to really matter, as long as you're paying attention to weakness types and giving them halfway decent weapons and armor. And really, you don't even need to be paying attention to outfitting your phantoms perfectly because you can just pass down any hand-me-downs from your regular characters. I wish there was a little bit more automation when it comes to creating things in this game. Say, for instance, in the intermission, if you could batch create items or weapons, or in the equipment selection screen, if you could do the try on new equipment feature, or even create weapons and armor for your units from the actual equipment selection screen itself. That would have gone a long way to smooth out the process and make it a little bit less repetitive. The other thing I wasn't really expecting is that this game is just surprisingly easy. Generally speaking, tactical RPGs are kind of known for their difficulty, or at least for having a ramping of difficulty as the game goes on. This game started out in the beginning having to manage resources in terms of what Kartia you're using a little bit, but as long as you're paying attention to the equipment that you have on your main units and not going crazy casting spells all the time, it doesn't take long before you get to the point where you really don't have to worry about what Kartia resources you have anymore. And in fact, I didn't really find any of the maps to be particularly difficult into the very, very end. The final map of Tox's level has the enemy creating a bunch of super powerful phantoms, which are going to completely outclass anything that you can create yourself. However, even in that case, all I had to do is make a mad dash to the boss character with all of my regular characters surround him and slowly chip away his life, making sure that the characters were also healing themselves every time. All that to say that I still think this is a pretty fun game. I just think that it could have used a little bit more time in development, or it would certainly benefit from a revisit to the series with more modern gameplay considerations in mind. I will say that the story was surprisingly engaging, and I actually found myself really invested in both the characters and their stories and finding out what was going to happen. They do a really good job of characterizations between the characters' animations and portraiture, but also oftentimes in between battle scenes or after battle scenes, there will be a inner monologue section with a particular focus character that will give you just a little bit of background on either themselves as a character, what they think about the current events, or other such thing. Another thing I can say in Kartia's favor is that the localization for the time is surprisingly good. At this time, localizing long JRPGs wasn't really up to par for what we're used to by today's standards, and it was pretty common that there would be at least some lines of dialogue that would not be as well worked, or maybe accidentally used a literal translation. But I feel like this game takes all of its characters into consideration, and whoever was working on the localization did an absolutely phenomenal job. For my playthrough, I only played through Tox's storyline, at the completion of which it gives you the chance to start a new game plus, which allows you to carry over all Kartia, created items, and current phantoms that you have. This is a cool idea, although kind of baffling because it means that the second playthrough will be even easier than the first playthrough, which seems odd to me. Finally, the last thing that I want to talk about is that this game is actually one of the only tactical RPGs I know of that has a built-in versus mode. Essentially, you can play against another person on the second controller, where you either take control of two sides made up of generic NPC characters, or if you have save data, you can load in your characters from the save data. I didn't play around with this mode at all this time around because obviously I'm just one person and it wouldn't be very fun playing against myself, but it is a really cool feature that's included, and outside of the arena battle modes in the Game Boy Advanced Fire Emblem games, which let you fight little one-on-one arena battles, it's not really a mode that you see come up very often, which is odd because you'd think in games where you want to make highly specialized crafted characters and parties that work really well together, there would be a big interest in a versus mode like that. Well, that about does it for Kartia. Ultimately, I'm pretty happy that I came back through and revisited this game, and maybe at some point I might replay the other character's story just to get the full picture, and maybe if I end up doing that, I will do another video on the comprehensive story. But in general, this game is kind of hard to get a hold of. Obviously, you can do it through very legal, totally not frowned upon ways of getting older games on the internet. It's not available on any sort of virtual console, unfortunately. I would love to see Atlus come back to this game at some point, or at least this game format, and do some reworking on the mechanics, because I think there is compelling gameplay here. It just unfortunately isn't developed enough for it to be really cool. As always, if you like what I'm talking about on the channel, which is mostly video games, then feel free to do all of the cool engagements. Hit that subscribe button, smash the like button, ring the bell, and I will see you in the next video. I hope everyone is doing well, and I love you all. Testing. So if I hold it like this, it's talk out of the corner of my mouth. What's up, bitches? Today we're talking about tactical RPGs. Tactical RPGs exploded onto the scene.